The galaxy remembered the warning. It had not come from humans themselves but from those who had once crossed them. The message had spread like wildfire across the star lanes, whispered in council chambers, carved into the ruins of fallen empires. Do not provoke humans. Yet warnings, in the vast cold of space, often fade. Pride buries memory. Power blinds the ambitious. And when the great civilizations of the galaxy looked toward Sol, they saw not a threat but a mystery wrapped in silence. For centuries, humanity had spoken little, kept to its borders, and gazed outward with unreadable eyes. But silence is not weakness. And the truth of what humanity was, what it had become, was already lost to those who thought they ruled the stars. The story begins not with a declaration of war, but with the first crack of arrogance, and the first ripple of fear. The Galactic Concord's chamber was a cathedral of stars. Holographic constellations shimmered above the vast council hall, casting cold light across the gathered delegates. Races from 100 worlds filled the tiers, their voices weaving a storm of debate that threatened to shake the very air apart. At the center of the floor stood a single symbol, the mark of Sol, suspended like a glowing scar in the council's holographic projection. It pulsed faintly, as though alive, and every eye in the chamber was drawn to it. Humanity remained silent, intoned Chancellor Vera of the Ocean Dominion, her voice sharp as shattered glass. They isolate themselves, trade sparingly, and share nothing of their technologies. What empire conceals its strength unless it harbors something dangerous? Across the chamber, a leathery-winged Jean delegate hissed in contempt. Or perhaps they are weak, Chancellor. Perhaps they hide because they cannot defend themselves. We give too much weight to myths. That word, myths, hung like poison. It was the old stories, after all, that had brought them here. Stories of fleets swallowed whole in forgotten wars. Of colonies erased with no warning. Of survivors, broken in body and spirit, who returned whispering only one thing before madness claimed them. Do not provoke humans. The hall stirred with unease. Some lowered their eyes, others bared their fangs in defiance. The warning was ancient, centuries old, a relic from a time when humanity had first stumbled onto the galactic stage. But memory in the galaxy was fickle, and pride even stronger. Ambassador Riskel of the Myran Commonwealth, her translucent body rippling with unease, rose to speak. We cannot ignore the records. Warnings were carved into the ruins of the Yalek Imperium. Their fleets vanished near Sol. Their final transmissions were filled with terror. Shall we repeat their folly? A roar of protest swept the chamber. They were weak, bellowed Lord Marshal Croth of the Targon Horde, his armor clattering as he slammed a clawed fist onto the council table. The Yalek fell because they were cowards. Do not dress it as some human sorcery. If the humans have power, it is time we drag it into the light and claim it for ourselves. The word claim echoed with dangerous hunger. The debate turns. The Concord was fracturing, torn between those who feared the silence and those who lusted to break it. Humanity is a wound upon the map, Croth continued. They stand at the edge of the galactic trade routes, their borders sealed. They refuse our envoys, and when they do answer, it is with vague pleasantries and no substance. What do they hide? Why should one species dictate such mystery while the rest of us bleed for survival? Others nodded grimly. The galaxy was not kind, resources were scarce, and wars of expansion common. Humanity's refusal to play the game, to take sides, to bend knee, or to assert dominance, was an affront to those who thrived on control. But Riskel's voice quivered with urgency. You do not understand. I have seen the fragments. Records sealed even from this chamber. Ships torn apart as if by gods. Tactics no other species has replicated. The humans. Our myth, Croth cut her off, his voice a blade. And myths die when tested. The council chamber erupted into chaos. Some shouted for caution, others for war. Through it all, The emblem of Sol pulsed faintly, a reminder that its people were absent from this very conversation. Humanity did not beg for peace, nor did they snarl threats across the stars. They watched. Silent. Waiting. And silence, in a galaxy of noise, was the most terrifying sound of all. The decision. When the chamber at last fell to order, Chancellor Vera's voice carried the weight of inevitability. "Very well," she said, her eyes reflecting the cold light of Sol's star. "We will test the truth. A fleet shall be dispatched to the borders of human space. Not to invade, but to provoke a response. If humanity has nothing to hide, we will know it. If they are dangerous, then better we discover it now than later." Gasps and murmurs spread like fire. The decision was made. The vote passed, carried by fear, arrogance, and hunger. A fleet, sleek warships bearing the banners of the Concord, would fly toward Sol. Their mission cloaked as diplomatic outreach, but their intent was clear to all. They went not to ask. They went to test. And testing, in the language of empires, always meant fire. Into the void. The fleet departed under banners of triumph. Dozens of warships, destroyers, cruisers, carriers, sailed into the void with engines blazing. To the common citizen, it was reassurance, to the admirals, it was curiosity, to the ambitious, it was opportunity. For weeks, they crossed the stars, slipping past trade routes into the quiet expanse near Sol. The region was unsettling, no smuggler outposts, no wandering merchants, no signs of life at all. It was as though the void itself bent around human space, an emptiness that seemed deliberate. Captain Yalen of the Concord flagship Radiance recorded her thoughts in the ship's log. "We have entered the borders of Sol. No resistance. No patrols. Only silence. I begin to wonder if the myths were right, not of human power, but of their absence. Perhaps they withered long ago, and their shadow is all that remains." But the shadow was very real. For on the third week, as the fleet drew near the edge of Sol's claimed territory, the void itself changed. Sensors detected nothing, but crew reported unease. Some swore they saw glimmers in the dark, vast shapes moving just beyond the reach of starlight. Then, without warning, the fleet's long-range comms died. One by one, systems faltered. Engines strained as though wading through invisible tides. Ghostly signals flickered across the bridge displays, fragments of language, unrecognizable, yet carrying a weight that pressed against the mind. And then, they came. The vanishing. The survivors would later recall only flashes. An armada of ships, colossal and silent, emerging from the black. They bore no markings, no signals, no broadcasts. Their hulls were angular, ancient yet impossibly advanced, bristling with weaponry that defied understanding. The humans had not sent a fleet. They had sent something else. The battle, if it could be called that, lasted mere minutes. Concord warships fired in panic, beams lashing into the void, but their strikes bent, dissipated, or simply vanished. In return, the human vessels moved like predators, precise, efficient, merciless. The Radiance was the first to fall, its hull sheared apart without a sound. Destroyers vanished in blinding flashes. Carriers spilled fire and fighters into the void, only to watch their squadrons erased like sparks in a storm. And through it all, there was silence. No boasts. No demands. No words at all. Only the slow, methodical destruction of an entire fleet. Weeks later, a single ship limped back into Concord space. Its crew were broken things, pale, trembling, their eyes wide with horrors unspoken. They could not describe what they had seen, not in full. Their recordings were corrupted, their memories shattered by fear. But they repeated one thing, again and again, their voices hoarse with dread. "Do not provoke humans." The council chamber fell to stunned silence when the report was delivered. Some delegates wept. Others raged. And some, the proudest among them, still muttered denial. Yet the warning had returned, reborn in blood and fire. What the galaxy did not know, what the galaxy could not know, was that the truth of humanity had already slipped from its grasp. The storm had been awakened. And it would not sleep again. The council chamber had never been so quiet. The survivors of the Radiant sat trembling in their restraints, their faces hollow with sleepless terror. Their uniforms were torn, their voices hoarse, their very presence like shadows of what they had once been. They did not look like soldiers of the Galactic Concord, they looked like prey who had stared into the maw of something far larger than themselves. Their testimony was fragmented, broken, yet every word carried weight that smothered the chamber. Gone, all gone, whispered Ensign Kara, her eyes unfocused, as if she were still adrift in the void. They didn't speak. Didn't warn us. They just, her voice cracked, dismantled us. Another survivor, Lieutenant Voss, clenched his hands until blood trickled from his palms. His voice was ragged with rage and despair. We fired everything. Beams, torpedoes, fighters, nothing struck. It was like they weren't even there. Our weapons, they didn't matter. When asked what they had seen, he could only mutter one phrase, over and over, as though it was etched into his very bones. Do not provoke humans. The denials. The delegates erupted into chaos. Lies, roared Lord Marshal Croth, slamming his claws against the stone table. Hallucinations of cowards who abandoned their posts. The fleet must have met with pirates, or worse, some trick of subspace. Ambassador Riskel of the Myron Commonwealth rose, her translucent form flickering with dread. And what of the recordings? Voss raised shaking hands to his temple. There were recordings. But they're gone. Corrupted. Every file, every sensor log. All that remains is. He broke off, his breathing sharp and shallow. Then he screamed, a raw sound that froze the chamber. They were watching us before we ever saw them. A hush swept the council. Even the most arrogant among them could not ignore the survivors' madness. The fleet had been strong, carriers, cruisers, destroyers, all built to face any enemy in the galaxy. And yet, only a single ship had returned, half-ruined and crewed by broken wretches. The silence weighed heavily. The shifting tide. Chancellor Vera, cold and calculating, leaned forward, her jeweled crown glinting in the starlight projection. Enough of their fear, she declared. If humanity possesses such weapons, then they must be taken. Do you not see? Whoever controls this phantom fleet will dominate the galaxy. Her words, laced with ambition, sparked a fever in the chamber. Fear gave way to greed. Dozens of voices cried out in agreement, drowning the survivors' whispers in the tide of pride. Ambassador Riskel alone tried to speak reason. You fools! You do not understand. This is not about conquest. The humans are not hiding weapons, they are weapons. But her words fell to deaf ears. The Concord had tasted the thought of power, and it poisoned their judgment. Then we must rally our strength, Croth growled, his eyes gleaming with bloodlust. If the humans are gods, we shall slay them. If they are demons, we shall cage them. But no longer will they haunt our shadows. And so it was decided. The Concord, in all its fractured glory, would assemble the largest armada in living memory. Hundreds of ships from every member world would march upon Sol. Not to probe, not to test, but to break humanity's silence once and for all. Humanity speaks. It happened before the fleet was ready. One quiet night cycle in the capital city of Arkan Prime, the sky tore open. Not with fire, nor invasion, but with a transmission, one that bypassed every defense, every encryption, every barrier the galaxy had ever built. Every world. Every ship. Every living being connected to the Concord's networks received it simultaneously. A simple broadcast. A single voice. Human. Enough. The word carried weight far beyond sound. It was not loud, but it pressed upon the chest like the deep rumble of tectonic plates shifting beneath the earth. It was the sound of a predator roused from sleep. We did not seek war. We did not seek dominion. We sought silence. You would not allow it. You came to our borders, you tested us, and you bled for your arrogance. We warned you once, long ago. You did not listen. Now you force our hand. The message shifted to visuals. Images cascaded across the skies of 1,000 worlds, fleets burning, empires collapsing, ruins of species the galaxy had forgotten. Battles fought in ages past, with humans at the center, not conquerors, but survivors, their ships forged in desperation and fury. And then the final image. A fleet. Vast beyond comprehension. Colossal warships, black as the void, bristling with weapons that pulsed like dying stars. They emerged from shadow as though the galaxy itself had birthed them from nightmare. The Black Armada. The broadcast ended. Silence returned. But this time, the silence was not humanity's. It was the galaxy's. The panic. Panic consumed the Concord. Markets collapsed overnight. Colonies rioted. Soldiers deserted, whispering of battles they could not win. On the floor of the council, delegates screamed accusations, clawing at one another as if betrayal could undo what they had witnessed. Some called for surrender. Others demanded preemptive strikes. More still fell into denial, insisting it was illusion, a bluff meant to cow them into submission. But deep down, every heart knew the truth. The humans had spoken. And their silence had been far kinder. The rallying cry. Still, pride is a stubborn disease. Croth, his armor gleaming, stood at the center of the council floor and roared over the chaos. We are the Concord. We are the rulers of the stars. Will you cower because of one message? One illusion? If they wish to threaten us, then we will bring the fire of 1,000 worlds upon them. We will crush their silence into dust. His fury lit a spark. Delegates rallied, shouting in defiance, their fear drowned by the intoxication of anger. Chancellor Vera seized the moment. Prepare the fleets. All of them. Humanity will learn they are not gods, and the galaxy will see them humbled. If the Black Armada exists, then it will burn. And so, the order was given. The largest armada in galactic history would assemble, a coalition of every major power, united not by trust, but by fear and pride. Thousands of warships, entire planetary militias, and mercenary flotillas were drafted. Shipyards burned with activity. The galaxy's beating heart shifted toward war. But in the quiet corners of the galaxy, whispers spread faster than war banners. Smugglers, traitors, outcasts, all spoke of the message, of the Black Armada. Some claimed to have seen human ships in the dark beyond mapped space. Others swore they had traded with human agents long ago, and that their warnings were real. The galaxy divided itself, the loud voices of war drowning the quiet whispers of truth. The stillness before. On the eve of departure, the Concord Armada gathered in the Nerith expanse, a vast stretch of emptiness chosen as the staging ground. It was a sight that eclipsed imagination. Rows upon rows of ships hung in formation, their hulls gleaming in starlight, their engines humming like the heartbeat of gods. It was strength incarnate. Pride manifest. The galaxy's might, condensed into one place. And yet, there was fear. Captains stared into the void, uneasy at its stillness. Soldiers whispered prayers, their hands trembling on their weapons. Admirals masked their dread with duty, but in the silence of their quarters, they too felt the weight of what awaited them. For silence, they now understood, was never empty. It was the waiting breath before a scream. And in that stillness, at the edge of perception, came the faintest flicker on their sensors. A shadow. A ripple in the void. The first sign that humanity was already watching. The galaxy had assembled its strength. Humanity had unveiled its warning. The collision was inevitable. The silence had shattered. Now came the storm. The Nerith expanse burned with light. Thousands of warships stood in perfect formation, their hulls reflecting the glow of nearby stars. The assembled Concord Armada was a monument to arrogance and fear, carriers stretching like floating cities, cruisers bristling with weapons, destroyers poised like spears in the void. From afar, it resembled a storm made of steel and fire. From within, it was a trembling heart, beating too fast. Admirals barked orders across shimmering comm lines, ensuring every vessel held its place. Generals paraded across hangar decks, reminding their soldiers that they fought for survival, for glory, for the galaxy itself. Yet for every speech, for every roar of defiance, there were 100 whispers. Whispers of the Black Armada. Whispers of a war already lost. The first shadow. It began without fanfare. Sensors detected faint anomalies at the edge of the expanse, ripples in subspace, like distortions in a pond. The fleet tightened formation, weapons warming. Then the shadows appeared. One by one, colossal forms emerged from the void. No engines flared. No banners waved. They simply were, vast shapes darker than the space around them, blotting out starlight as they moved. The Black Armada. The human warships were unlike anything the galaxy had built. Angular, massive, each vessel carried the silence of an executioner. No signals, no hails, no declarations, only the weight of inevitability. And when they arrived, the galaxy understood. The Concord had not assembled an armada to challenge humanity. They had assembled an armada to feed it. The battle begins. Fire, roared Lord Marshal Croth from his flagship. The void lit up as thousands of beams and torpedoes streaked toward the Black Armada. It was a sight of terrible beauty, the combined fury of the galaxy unleashed in a single breath. And then, nothing. The human ships moved with impossible grace, shadows flowing like predators through a swarm of prey. Weapons that should have crippled stars bent, shattered, or dissolved before striking their hulls. Return fire came not as volleys but as executions, a single blast here, a slicing beam there, each strike tearing through Concord ships with surgical precision. Carriers erupted in blossoms of flame. Cruisers split apart silently, their crews gone before they could scream. Entire squadrons of fighters vanished into streaks of light as unseen forces ripped them from existence. It was not war. It was culling. The descent into chaos. On the radiant spear, Admiral Lurok gripped the edge of his command chair until his claws cracked. Hold formation. Do not break. But his orders were drowned in chaos. Ships scattered in panic, their formations collapsing as human vessels carved through them with ease. The Concord's greatest strength, unity, had become its greatest weakness. Across the expanse, desperate transmissions filled the commnet. Shields collapsing. We've lost engines. They're inside our formations. I can't. And then, only static. The Black Armada did not boast, did not taunt. It destroyed with cold finality, each action devoid of malice yet dripping with judgment. The human voice. Then, for the second time, humanity spoke. The voice crackled across every channel, calm and measured, like a teacher addressing children who had misbehaved. You were warned. Admirals froze, soldiers faltered, entire fleets hesitated mid-battle. The voice was neither triumphant nor cruel, it was weary, as though the speaker pitied them. You mistake restraint for weakness. You mistake silence for surrender. We did not seek this war, but you forced our hand. Know this, Concord, humanity does not conquer. Humanity survives. And survival has made us what we are. As the voice faded, the Black Armada struck again, faster, harder, merciless. Concord ships died by the dozens. Revelation. In the chaos, Ambassador Riskel's transport hovered at the edge of the battlefield, shielded by escorts that were rapidly failing. She stared through her crystalline hull, her translucent form trembling with realization. This was not conquest. The humans were not expanding, not occupying, not enslaving. They were punishing. Every strike was measured, every death purposeful. They targeted command ships, carriers, and heavy weapons, dismantling the Concorde's capacity for war while leaving escape vessels untouched. It was not extermination. It was demonstration. "They're showing us," Riskel whispered, her voice quivering with awe. "They're showing us what they can do, and what they choose not to do." The breaking point. The Concorde fleet, once proud, fractured entirely. Kroth's flagship was torn in half, his final bellow of rage cut short as fire consumed him. Admirals screamed contradictory orders. Soldiers fled in escape pods, their discipline shattered. The Black Armada pressed no further than necessary. Where the Concorde faltered, they allowed retreat. Where ships fled, they did not pursue. Their message was carved in wreckage, not in genocide. On the bridge of the Concorde's central flagship, Chancellor Vera stood in silence as her empire crumbled around her. The pride that had driven her to this war drained away, replaced by something colder than fear. She saw the truth at last. This was never about dominance. Humanity had not returned to rule the galaxy. They had returned to ensure the galaxy never again forced them into silence. The last stand. A fragment of the Concorde fleet regrouped, rallying under Admiral Lurok. His voice thundered across the channels, desperate and defiant. "We are the Concorde. We will not bow." With a final cry, his battered fleet hurled itself at the nearest human warship. Torpedoes streaked, beams flared, and in return, a single pulse of light erupted from the human vessel, vaporizing Lurok's entire formation in an instant. The silence that followed was absolute. No more orders. No more defiance. Only surrender in all but name. The reckoning. When the battle ended, the Nerith expanse was a graveyard. Concorde wreckage drifted like broken bones, glowing faintly against the dark. Survivors scattered across the void, their ships crippled, their weapons gone. The Black Armada lingered in silence, watching. Then, as one, they turned and vanished into the depths of space, fading into the shadows from which they had come. No demands. No occupation. Only a message. The voice returned one last time. "Do not provoke humans. You will not survive it. We ask only this, leave us in peace. Do not test us again. For if you do, there will be no Concorde left to remember the warning." And then they were gone. The council convened weeks later, broken and bloodied. Half its seats were empty, their delegates lost to fire. The survivors sat in silence, haunted by the weight of their failure. No one dared speak of vengeance. No one dared whisper of conquest. For the first time in history, the Concorde had been humbled, not by domination, but by restraint. Ambassador Riskel's voice carried softly through the chamber. "We thought humanity was a wound upon the map. But now we see the truth. They are the scar. The scar that reminds us what survival costs, and what awakening such a force truly means." Her words lingered in the hollow air. From that day onward, the galaxy changed. Fleets patrolled less eagerly. Wars slowed. Ambition dulled. And in every council, every command chamber, every whispered meeting, one truth bound them all. The humans had not sought power. They had sought peace. And the galaxy, too late, had realized that silence was their greatest mercy. The stars burned on, indifferent as always. But in the shadows between them, where the Black Armada watched unseen, one truth remained unshakable. The warning had been given. The price had been paid. And the galaxy would never again forget humanity.